morning of August 21st, I flew out of Nashville and arrived in Moscow, Russia on August 22nd. After clearing immigration and customs at Sheremetyevo 2 airport, we took a bus to the Northern River Terminal. Here, we boarded the MS Nikolai Chernyshevsky, which was the ship Vantage chartered for this river cruise. After breakfast, we met the Blue Group's program manager, Lydia Usakova, and made our way through the Moscow traffic into the center of the city. Our first stop was at Red Square. It is about 500 meters long and anchored by St. Basil's Cathedral on one end and the State History Museum on the other. Ivan III ordered its creation near the end of the 15th century, and it was originally used as a market. The square gets its name from the Russian word krasnaya. In Old Russian, this originally meant beautiful, but the meaning later changed to red. The association to communism is completely coincidental. St. Basil's Cathedral was commissioned by Ivan the Terrible to celebrate the capture of the Tatar stronghold of Kazan. Building was completed in 1561. The cathedral gets its name from the Holy Fool, St. Basil the Blessed. He was buried beneath one of the cathedral's chapels, which also bears his name. Lenin's mausoleum is another important landmark on Red Square. Lenin, who died in 1924 and actually wished to be buried next to his mother in St. Petersburg, has his body preserved and on display inside. On the northeastern side of Red Square, opposite the Kremlin, is GUM. This was a State Department store, but is now a high-end shopping mall. After leaving the Red Square, we headed to the Novodevichy Convent. It was founded in 1524 to celebrate the capture of Smolensk from Lithuania. It was later used by Peter the Great as a prison for his half-sister Sophia. We had lunch on board pleasure boats on the Moskva River. The cruise along the river provided excellent and unique views of the Kremlin, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, and Gorky Park. After the cruise, we visited Sparrow Hill, formerly known as Lenin Hills, and then headed back to the ship for dinner. After dinner, we went to the Nikolin Circus, also known as the Old Moscow Circus. It was named after Yuri Nikolin, who was one of Russia's most famous clowns and a longtime producer at the circus. On August 24th, we headed to the Kremlin. The first place we visited was the State Armory. It was built as a museum by Nicholas I in 1851. Inside are collections of armor, clothes, carriages, icons, silverware, and also Fabergé eggs. 54 Fabergé eggs were made for the Tsars Alexander III and Nicholas II between 1885 and 1917. Each year, the Tsar would present an egg to his family as an Easter present. Every egg took about a year to make and contained a surprise inside. The armory has 10 eggs on display. The rest are in private collections owned by other museums or are missing. Also on the grounds of the Kremlin is the Cathedral of the Annunciation, the Cathedral of the Archangel, the Ivan the Great Bell Tower, and the Cathedral of the Assumption. Next to the bell tower is the Tsar Bell, which is the largest bell in the world. A piece broke off shortly after it was cast in 1737 after it accidentally came into contact with water while it was cooling off. The Kremlin also contains the former Senate building, which now houses the Russian presidential administration. In the evening, we headed to the new opera theater at the Moscow Hermitage Gardens to see a performance by the Imperial Russian Ballet. We saw Scheherazade, Walpurgis Nights, and Bolero. On Saturday morning, we took a tour of some of the ornate stations in the Moscow Metro. The first station we visited was the Revolutionary Square station. Three stops from Revolutionary Square is Kivskaya Station. The frescoes in the station depict Ukrainian life. The last station we visited was Smolenskaya, which has a relief of the Red Army in battle. From the subway station, we took a short walk to Arbat Street to do a little shopping. Arbat Street is one of the main pedestrian streets in Moscow and is lined with shops and restaurants. After returning to the ship for lunch, we took a courtesy bus back into the city to see a little more of the city center. On our last morning in Moscow, we visited the Tretyakov Art Gallery. It was founded in 1856 and is known for its priceless collection of Russian paintings and icons. At around 2:30, the ship left Moscow and headed up the Moscow Canal toward the Volga River. On our way up the canal, we passed through many ship locks. In the evening, we had a captain's welcome reception and a captain's welcome dinner.
Natasha Stepanova, Larissa Tkach. Let's welcome them on board this ship tour and tell them.
Following dinner, there was a short folk concert by some of the onboard musicians. While cruising down the Volga River toward Uklik, Lydia gave a Russian language lesson where we were taught how to read Cyrillic and learned to sing some Russian songs. Also in the morning, there was a presentation on Russian handicrafts by Anna, the arts and crafts consultant who ran the ship's gift shop.
Somebody bought Japanese funny old head man, Fukuruma. Yes, it was nesting doll, yeah.
At around 2 p.m., we arrived in the town of Uklik. From the riverboat pier, we walked to the town's Kremlin. Here, we visited the church of St. Dimitri on the Blood. In 1591, Ivan the Terrible's son Dimitri was murdered, probably on the orders of Boris Godunov, the regent. The church was built in the 1690s on the spot where the body was found. Also on the grounds of Uglik's Kremlin is the Transfiguration Cathedral. It is an active Russian Orthodox church that was built in 1713. Before dinner, we had some time to go shopping at the stalls near the pier. Dinner was not on board the ship. Instead, we divided up into smaller groups and had home-hosted dinners. At 8 p.m., we reboarded the Chernyshevsky and departed Uglik. In the morning, we arrived in Yaroslavl. The city was founded in the 11th century on the site of a pagan trading post. According to legend, Yaroslavl the Wise was able to subjugate the inhabitants of the trading post by killing their sacred bear with an axe. As a result, the bear and axe has become the symbol of the city. Our first stop was at the Yaroslavl Puppet Theater. We next visited the Monastery of the Transfiguration of the Savior. The monastery was founded in the 12th century. In the 16th century, it was one of Russia's richest and best fortified monasteries. Near the center of the city is the Church of Elijah the Prophet. It was built by fur merchants in the 17th century and is famous for its well-preserved frescoes. At around lunchtime, we left Yaroslavl and headed back up the Volga River. One of the activities in the afternoon was painting our own Matryoshka dolls. Just before dinner, we passed through the Rybinsk Lock and into the Rybinsk Reservoir. By the time the reservoir was filled in 1947, over 150,000 people had to be resettled. After dinner, there was a Russian dance class and a performance of Russian Soul by Igor, the Neva Bar musician. Before we got to Goritsi in the afternoon, we had a lecture on Russian history by one of the program managers, and a talk on Russian vodka by Eugene, one of the bartenders. At 1 p.m., we arrived in Goritsi and took buses to the nearby town of Kirilov. At Kirilov, we toured the Kirilo-Belozersky Monastery. It was founded in 1397 by a monk who was shown the towers of the monastery in a vision he had of the Virgin Mary. The monastery is now a museum and has a nice collection of Orthodox icons. While continuing up the Volga-Baltic Canal, we had a blini cooking demonstration by Chef Pavel. Following the demonstration, we had a blini and vodka tasting. We all had a shot of plain, pepper, and cranberry vodka to go along with our blinis with red caviar. After a short nap, I awoke to discover that the dining staff had mysteriously transformed into pirates, kidnapped the cooks, and were threatening us with no desserts for dinner.
No dessert tonight.
No dessert. Now that's
On August 30th in the morning, we exited the Volga-Baltic Canal and entered Lake Onega. It is the second largest lake in Europe. While cruising the lake, we were able to visit the ship's bridge.
25 meters.
Ширина 16
The
метров,
width is 16 meters
высота 13
and the
метров
height is 13 meters.
и осадка судна 3 метра.
And the immersion of the ship is 3 meters.
In the afternoon, we had a Russian tea party. At 5 p.m. we arrived in Kisi. After trading our keys for our boarding passes from the reception desk, we started out on our walking tour of the island. The three main buildings on the island are the Church of the Transfiguration, the Bell Tower, and the Church of the Intercession. Together, these form a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Church of the Transfiguration was built in 1714 without the use of a single nail. The Church of the Intercession was built in 1764 and is a working Russian Orthodox church. Inside the church is a nice collection of 16th to 18th century icons. Also on the island is the Church of the Resurrection of Lazarus. It was actually constructed in Murom in the 14th century and moved here. It may be one of the oldest wooden buildings in Russia. We were supposed to leave Kisi at 7 p.m., but it was a long way back to the ship. Luckily, no one was left behind with the poisonous snakes on the island. After everyone returned their boarding passes, we left Kisi and went to eat dinner. Later in the evening, there's a gala concert by the onboard musicians. Vendrogi is a fairly recent reconstruction of a traditional Russian village along the banks of the Svir River. The artisans in the village workshops create a wide variety of traditional Russian items. For lunch, we had a shashlik picnic on shore. Shashlik is a Russian form of shish kebab. After lunch, we continued down the Svir River, passing through the lower Svir ship lock. Since this was the last day of cruising before we reached St. Petersburg, there was a captain's farewell reception before dinner.
And one more time, we do not say goodbye, we say see you. See you on river cruises in Russia, on board of our ship.
Following the reception, we entered Lake Ladoga, which is the largest lake in Europe and the 14th largest in the world. This was the only part of our cruise where the water got a little rough. Later in the evening, there was a talent show put on by the passengers and crew. The show included singing, music, a ballet performance, and some funny skits.
Is it time?
Is it time?
No.
Is it time?
Is it time?
Is it time?
No.
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 Is it time?
Is it time?
Is it time?
Yes. Yes.
We were told that we passed a 14th century cathedral, a Kremlin demolished by the Mongol Tartars, and a statue of Lenin, this time with Paul, George, and Ringo also represented. Day 12. In St. Petersburg, the ship took on 1,200 tons of water, 1 ton of fresh fruit, and the passengers brought over 2 tons of souvenirs. I've had a good time on this trip. I think I would refer to it as my animal trip. I ate like a pig. I drank like a fish. I followed the guide like a sheep. And I carried souvenirs like a camel.
On September 1st, we arrived in St. Petersburg. Our first stop on the city tour was a quick stop at the Smolny Convent. It was founded by Tsarina Elizabeth to educate young noblewomen. The convent was designed by Bartolomeo Rastrelli in 1748. Next, we stop by the rostral columns to take in the view of the Winter Palace, the Admiralty, and the St. Peter and Paul Fortress. Work began on the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul in 1712 and was finished in 1733. The cathedral contains the tombs of all of the Romanov monarchs since Peter the Great, except for Peter II and Ivan VI. Nicholas II and his family were reburied here fairly recently in 1998. Our next stop was at St. Isaac's Square to see St. Isaac's Cathedral. It was opened in 1858 and is the fourth largest cathedral in the world, behind St. Peter's in Rome, St. Paul's in London, and the Cathedral in Florence. On St. Isaac's Square is a monument to Nicholas I. Our last stop on the city tour was the Church on Spilled Blood. It is also known as the Resurrection Church of Our Savior. It was built on the spot where Tsar Alexander II was assassinated on March 1, 1881. It was built between 1883 and 1907 and was modeled after St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. During World War II, the church was badly damaged. Restoration work began in 1970 and was completed in 1997. In the afternoon, we took a courtesy bus back into the city from the ship to the Square of Arts. From there, we took a short walk to Nevsky Prospect, St. Petersburg's main shopping and entertainment street. One of the main churches on Nevsky Prospect is the Cathedral of Our Lady of Kazan. Building began in 1801 and it was completed in 1811. The architect who designed it was inspired by St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. Also on Nevsky Prospect is Gostiny Dvor. This is a very large shopping complex that was originally built between 1761 and 1785 and reconstructed after World War II. We left the city center at 4:30 and headed back to the ship. After dinner, we went to see the ballet Gazelle at the Hermitage Theater. It was built in 1785 and is the oldest theater building in St. Petersburg. On September 2nd, we first stopped at the cruiser Aurora. A shot from its gun signaled the Bolsheviks to storm the Winter Palace, marking the start of the October Revolution in 1917. After leaving the Aurora, we headed to the Hermitage Museum. The Hermitage consists of a couple of buildings, including the Winter Palace, the Large Hermitage, and the Little Hermitage. Building began in 1754 on the Winter Palace for Tsarina Elizabeth. Most of the interiors were remodeled by Catherine the Great and her successors. Although the Winter Palace remained an imperial home until 1917, the last two Tsars spent most of their time living in other palaces. The Little Hermitage was built between 1764 and 1775 for Catherine the Great to hold the royal family's art collection. The Large Hermitage was built for Nicholas I between 1839 and 1851 and was opened as a public museum in 1852. The Hermitage has a collection of over 3 million items. Amongst the many artists who have works contained within the museum are Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Rembrandt. In front of the Winter Palace, with the Alexander Column in its center, is Palace Square. This is where Bloody Sunday took place, where the Tsar's troops fired on thousands of unarmed demonstrators in 1905. This is also from where the Bolsheviks attacked the Winter Palace in 1917. On the opposite side of the square is the General Staff Building, which used to be the headquarters of the Russian Army. In the evening, we went to the Menshikov Concert Hall to see a folk show performance called The Soul of Russia. Champagne and red caviar was served during the intermission. On September 3rd, we traveled a little outside of St. Petersburg to Peter the Great's summer palace, Peterhof. It is also known as Petrodvorets. Peterhof is often called the Russian Versailles. The main highlight of the palace is the Grand Cascade. This is a collection of fountains that was partially designed by Peter the Great himself. The Grand Cascade was built to celebrate Russia's victory in the Great Northern War against Sweden in the beginning of the 18th century. On the grounds of the palace, there are trick fountains that will surprise those that get too close. The only building that we actually visited was the Catherine Wing. This was built for Tsarina Elizabeth between 1747 and 1754. Catherine the Great was staying here while she orchestrated the overthrow of her husband Peter III in 1762. Later in the afternoon, we took a courtesy bus into the center of St. Petersburg and walked along the city's many canals and bridges. last full day in Russia, we traveled to the town of Pushkin to see Catherine Palace. The palace was built for Tsarina Elizabeth, and she named it in honor of her mother, Catherine I. Catherine the Great had many of the rooms remodeled during her reign. The palace was badly damaged during World War II, but about 20 of the staterooms have been restored and are now opened. For a fee, photography is allowed inside all of the rooms except for the amber room. The amber room is completely covered in amber. The Nazis looted the original amber panels during World War II, but they were either lost or destroyed while in transit. The panels in the current amber room are reproductions. After leaving Pushkin, we returned to the Chernyshevsky. The next morning, we had an early morning trip to the airport and then flew back to the United States.